Hi there, everyone. It's Josh here from the WWSCC, and as I mentioned in my Mario Andretti diecast review, I would talk about s- uh well Stewart-Haas Racing coming into Formula One. So this is going to be this is going to take a bit of time. So we're going to take some time, digest it, and then we can then think and project on what could possibly happen for the new not Stewart Haas, but Haas from the Gene Haas's side of the Stewart Haas team. Stewart, Tony will be doing NASCAR, but Gene will be doing Formula One. So we need to separate the two. It's going to be Haas Racing, not Stewart Haas Racing in Formula One. It'll be still Stewart Haas in NASCAR. There's no doubt about that. That's still there, but it will be the Haas side that will be racing in Formula One. So uh, let's talk about the development of the story. To be honest with you, this idea of a new Formula One team, especially an American Formula One team, has been going on since 2010, when there was a team called US GP, which would have been US Grand Prix team, tried to actually get into Formula One for the 2010 season. They had the team and everything to go. I even heard at one point Danica Patrick was contacted as a possible either development driver or an actual driver to race in Formula One. So, unfortunately for them, the deal didn't go through, and it did not happen, and therefore USGP were basically null and void, and they did not continue any further. And then, as we then moved on, there had been speculation on what teams could fill gaps left by certain teams like Hispania Racing, Virgin Racing. Although Virgin Racing did become Marussia Racing. Quite a number. If you remember, over the years, Formula One has had a number of teams that have entered and have left Formula One, while teams that failed then became other teams and then had better success. For example, I'll give you the best example. In the early 2000s, Jaguar came into Formula One. They were around for 5. I think it was 4 or 5 seasons, and eventually they folded, and then they became Red Bull. And we all know the success that Red Bull's been having in Formula One over these past 4 years with Sebastian Vettel. So yeah, and then we then there was rumor I think last year, and then leading up to the announcement of what's going to happen next year, there was rumors about new teams entering, who could possibly enter, and then just last week we find out that Gene Haas announced to the world that he had got uh, a license. I can consider it a super license or Formula One license for a team, for his team to compete in Formula One. And this will be the first time, I think since the 80s, that a American-backed team has entered Formula One. So it's been 3 decades since an American-backed team came to Formula One. So there's quite a gap to fill there. And interestingly enough, it's been more than 50 years since a NASCAR team entered Formula One. The last time that happened was Penske. That's right. Roger Penske and Penske Racing won Formula One. In fact, Roger Penske actually drove in Formula One. I think he drove 5 or 7. He drove about 7 races in the 60s, and then left, and then came back and had Penske Racing. I think it lasted only 3 seasons, I believe, and then they lasted 3 seasons, and then they went off, and then they went back to the US and then compete in kart, which is now IndyCar and NASCAR and all that. So here's okay. So there's going to be quite a number of questions over what's going to happen with this new team. There's going to be a lot of benefactors that they've got to question. Like, for example, who's going to be the team principal? who's going to be importantly the drivers, the car manufacturer. Um, I think that would be about it. I think that's about it, really. Can't think of anything else. I would say tire supply, but there's only one in Formula One, Pirelli, unless somehow Goodyear can get on board and bring back the Goodyear tire manufacturer since they last were in Formula One, which was the 90s, and they had great success, and they're still one of the most dominant tire manufacturers in Formula One history, only to be rivaled by the Japanese tire manufacturer Bridgestone. So I think we're gonna talk. We've got to talk about quite a number of things. I think number one, can they do it? We've seen in Formula One, it's a cliche for a new team to come in, to fail miserably, and then keep failing miserably until eventually they run out of funding and they have to pull out. Now, the only exception to this was Braun in 2009, when they were originally BAR Honda, Honda Racing. They almost lost their jobs, and thanks to Ross Braun keeping as many of the old Honda racing team together, including the drivers that won them the Constructors' Championship as well as the Drivers' Championship, Rubens Barrichello and Jenson Button, who went on to race for McLaren, and he's still there now driving at McLaren. They did tremendously with what they had. Like, they were a lower middle team to eventually become world champions. And not only that, but they also brought Red Bull into the mix, and Red Bull now are the number one team to beat in Formula One. So I don't think Stewart-Haas will be I don't think they'll be a winning team, but they might be a good mid-table contender against teams like Lotus or Force India that like get them in the mix. Like they'll be at least a middle lower team, so they're fast enough to beat the shit teams, K2M and Marussia, and they'll be good enough to compete with, like, say, Force India, Williams, and Lotus, that kind of thing. Next, team principal. I wouldn't say. I'm not going to say much about the team principal, because team principal is kind of it's a very difficult job to pick one. But what they need is a team member who has had experience being a team principal, knows the ins and outs of Formula One, knows the right strategies to pull, and get the job done and get the car safely across the finish line and get points. At best, aim for a top 10. Recently, Stefano Dominicano was fired by Ferrari, so it'll be interesting if Gene Haas announces that Stefano will be the new team principal at Haas Racing for F1. That could be something interesting. I would like to see what happens there. But until then, we don't know. Next on the agenda is what I think will be a very. I think these two, right. So the next, I'm going to be talking about the manufacturer and the drivers. These are the two biggest question marks I have to Haas Racing entering Formula One. Haas Racing is I'm going to refer to it because it's Stewart-Haas Racing. Their manufacturer in NASCAR is Chevrolet. Chevrolet do V8 engines for NASCAR. They do V8 engines for NASCAR. So if Haas Racing can get Chevrolet to do a V6 turbocharged engine, then I don't see any problems happening there. Unless Haas Racing decides not to go with their traditional supplier and instead go with a new supplier like they're having in Formula One this year. For example, next year McLaren are no longer going to be supplied by Mercedes. They're going to stop their 20. They've stopped their 20 year deal with Mercedes, and they are now officially going to have Honda engines, which is going to rekindle the Honda McLaren relationship they had in the mid '80s, early '90s, where McLaren and Honda were virtually unstoppable, winning them multiple championships, constructor titles, driver titles, and let's not forget the McLaren the McLaren MP44, the greatest Formula One car ever made, was powered by a Honda engine, a Honda V12 turbocharged engine with 1200 brake horsepower that won every race except the Italian Grand Prix in 1988. That's what you call a unstoppable and brilliant relationship. For Haas Racing, I keep referring to Stewart-Haas. If I keep saying Stewart-Haas, I'm sorry, but Haas Racing, if they're gonna go with they most likely will not go with the new engine supply. They will not go with Honda. They will not go with the Ferrari. They will not go with the Mercedes. I would think they would stick with Chevrolet and get Chevrolet into Formula One for the first time ever, which has never been done before. Chevrolet have never entered Formula One, so if they can get Chevrolet to make a V6 turbocharged engine with 720 brake horsepower, then that will be interesting to see. If not, I would think Honda would be the second best option for them to choose, because if they can't get Chevrolet, they can just ask Honda or Mercedes even. But I would think on a whole, Chevrolet would be the prime manufacturer, I would think, unless they go to Honda. Then that's about it. The next point. This is important. This one, drivers. Now I'm gonna say, in Stewart-Haas's stable, there are only two drivers. No wait, hang on. 1, 2, 3. Hang on. Stewart, Patrick, Harvick. What was the other one? I'm forgetting. I'm losing my mind. I would think, on a whole, I'm just trying to remember who's the four. The drivers in Stewart-Haas Racing all have open wheel experience. They are used to open wheel racing. If you look at the stable at Stewart-Haas Racing at the minute in NASCAR, they have Tony Stewart, Danica Patrick, Kevin Harvick, and Kurt Busch. Hang on, I'm just looking up now. Did he compete? Just trying to remember. Wait, no. Oh wait, yes he did. Yes. Aha. Okay. Oh wait, he only. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Kurt Busch, Kevin Harvick, I believe. I'm just trying to make sure here. Said time putting in another ball. No, he didn't. Okay, right. So there are only 3 drivers in the Stewart-Haas Racing stable that have open wheel experience: Danica Patrick, Tony Stewart, and Kurt Busch. In fact, Kurt this year is going to be doing the Indianapolis 500 for Andretti Motorsports. Of those 3 drivers, I think the realistic option would be, I'm not saying they will be the drivers, but I'm just saying the realistic idea is Danica is the only driver out of the Stewart-Haas Racing stable I would put in for the new Formula One team, because she's had I think she's had 7 years open wheel experience. She's led laps at the Indianapolis. I'm going for achievements now. She's she's led. She's used. Go. She's used to driving at 200 plus mile an hour speeds in IndyCar. In fact, if you remember, she was one of the first drivers to lead laps in the Indy 500, as well as getting a top 5 finish. She's won in IndyCar. She won an IndyCar race, and her early years were, of course, driving in open wheel. And also, next year we're going to be having Susie Wolff, hopefully, driving for Martini Williams. And if Danica gets into that mix, it'll be the first time ever we would have 2 female drivers in Formula One racing on the same track. However, this isn't what I'm saying will happen. I'm just saying if it might happen. Now, I know you're all going to be asking, like, oh, put Tony Stewart in, he's so going to do it. You're right there. Tony Stewart, no doubt, has open wheel experience. He has won IndyCar. He's won IndyCar championships. He's won IndyCar races. He's used to the 200 mile per hour 4G force, the forces of extreme G. But the problem is his weight. If you've seen Tony, he is quite a big fella. And if you look at Formula One races nowadays, they're usually quite either tall or quite skinny. And you see Tony, he's big, he's tall, but he's a bit chubby. And I feel as the weight of him would affect the car. Because when you sit in your own car, depending on how heavy you are, you weigh yourself down. So at first it looks alright, no one's in the car, it looks quite high. But then when you sit in it, it starts to lower down. And then when more people come in, they're lower and lower and lower. They add weight into the car, making it lower. And let's not forget how low these Formula One cars are. They're really low. They're nearly close. They're about only a few inches from the ground. And if Tony was to drive a F1 car, which he has done before, however, the F1 cars back then were about a few centimeters taller. I think about 3 centimeters off the ground or something like that. Or maybe 4, I don't know. They were a few centimeters off the ground. He was fine in that, but these new turbocharged V6s, as well as the new generation of F1 cars, are a lot more closer to the ground. And if Tony was to actually drive these cars, I think his weight would not only affect the forces of the car, he would be bouncing off the road, as well as weighing the car down, not getting up to full speed, which could affect his performance, as well as maybe give him backache and ass ache on the trying to do 70 plus laps around Silverstone, for example. That would be difficult for him. That would be a strainful thing. Races aside, if they're going, but for actual races, I would actually think Scott Speed would be a good choice. He's been in Formula One before. He's an IndyCar. He's an IndyCar champion, and I would definitely like him. I would actually like him as a candidate for driving for the new Haas team. Another driver. I think we should get another IndyCar driver. I would like to see. I'd like to see maybe James Hinchcliffe. I would like to see James Hinchcliffe as a driver. I mean, he's been having a good few years in IndyCar. I would like him to be rewarded with being given the opportunity to drive in Formula One, and Hinchcliffe is Canadian, and I think it would be a great honor if a Canadian driver was to appear in Formula One again. And let's not forget the royalty of Canadian drivers. In fact, the only royalty of Canadian drivers in Formula One are the Villeneuve family, Jacques and Gilles. Jacques, by us Formula One fans, is considered one of the greatest drivers of all time. And if you want an example of how great he is, watch the 1979 French Grand Prix when he goes at it against René Armour. And he's not bad, and in the final few laps, and He's not battling for the lead. He's battling for second place, and it was that entertaining. People actually thought that they were battling for the lead, when in fact they were battling for second, and it's still considered by us F1 fans to be one of the greatest spectacles we've ever seen. And of course, you have to include Jacques. Now I know a lot of you are hating Jacques at the minute, but you have to remember that Jacques back in Formula 1 was the bomb, especially when he drove for the Williams team, and being the only Canadian driver to win the Formula 1 World Championship, as well as fulfilling his dad's legacy by, a Villeneuve finally winning a world championship, not only for himself but for also Canada. And Canada loves Formula 1. In fact, no matter how many... In fact, it was recently surveyed that the most popular Grand Prix of all Formula 1 is the Canadian Grand Prix. Just imagine the amount of Canadian fans and Canadian spectators going to Gilles Villeneuve circuit for 2015 if James Hinchcliffe was driving for Haas Racing. There would be tons of Canadian flags, a ton of Canadian fans, a ton of Formula 1 fans there, all wanting to see James Hinchcliffe. Not to see him win. If he could get the win, it'll be fantastic. But just to see a Canadian driver back in Formula 1. And I would have no problem with that. So, yes, Scott Speed and James Hinchcliffe, I would say, as the two possible candidates I would like to see in Formula 1. Fictional candidates, Danica and... just for a joke, Juan Pablo Montoya. Hola, jefe. Anyway, so now we're gonna get. I'm gonna do the final point now. Will Stewart-Haas? I'm gonna keep saying that every time now. Will Stewart-Haas F1 racing succeed? Meh. That's my answer. Just meh. The reason I say meh is because if they do a good job, like I said at the start, if they are a mid-table runner, if they do well in the middle of, like, between Williams, Lotus, Force India and that, they will have no problems for quite some time. My only problem is going to be the funding and supplying of their cars and their engines. That's the problem. That's the problem that they got to look out for, because otherwise they could massively fail in Formula 1 completely, and that is what I'm worried about if such a thing does happen. Because if that does happen, then Gene Haas investing in Formula 1 was a waste of time, a waste of money, and just a poor effort on the terms that a man from NASCAR who has had no F1 experience whatsoever, only his drivers would have had, like, open wheel experience, which is what is needed for Haas Racing. And given that IndyCar is the biggest open wheel racing in North America, as well as the fact that some NASCAR drivers have open wheel experience, so if he can somehow find a way to get the drivers either from NASCAR or IndyCar into the team, then he might be alright. But an engine supplier, a manufacturer, and a team put it all together, then he needs to be careful, because there have been a number of teams that have entered Formula 1 and have wasted their time doing absolutely nothing. Minardi was a famous example of just they're the crap team, but we like them. And then if you want a completely pathetic team that only had one season and then just like packed it in, Spiker F1 from Holland. One season in and then they're out. But instead, they then became Force India. So the Spiker team was gone, but then they rekindled themselves as Force India, and Force India have made a good name for themselves, which is good, seeing as though if anyone saw the Bahrain Grand Prix, they had a hell of a race with their drivers Perez and is it Hulkenberg? Sergio. Was it Perez and? Hang on. Perez and. The other driver's name is it Hulkenberg? Yeah, that's it. Hulkenberg. Yeah, I thought it was Hulkenberg. I just had to be sure. Anyways. So yeah. So Stewart-Haas, if they're gonna succeed, they need to have good. They need to have good. A good budget. A trust in management. A good team. Find a good manufacturer, Chevrolet or Honda. Make sure that they don't become a laughing stock like most teams, and of course, they need to find the right drivers for this open wheel experience. This is the first time Gene Haas has gone into this new experience for the Haas side of Stewart-Haas Racing. He needs to be careful on what he does. If he does everything right, then we could see ourselves having a worthy contender in Formula 1. But we're not going to know that until next year in Melbourne in March. That is when we'll find out what Haas Racing is going to be like, as well as the fact that we need to find out who's going to be driving for Haas Racing. Hinchcliffe and Scott Speed are my money as being the two drivers to get into the Haas Racing stable. So I think that's everything I've needed to say. Thank you for listening to this. As always, you can or you can subscribe if you want more of these kind of in-depth things. I will gladly continue on, and I'll gladly, if there's any, I can do, reviews of, certain races, although I'm not going to review the NASCAR racing, so NASCAR racing here in the UK is a lot more difficult to watch. I can give, maybe I can give reviews on Formula 1 news, which will be a lot more easier, seeing as Formula 1 is king here in Europe, especially in the UK, and, all I can say is, thank you for listening. Thank you for liking the silly picture that I made, especially with when it says this side, as in not the Stewart side, the Haas side of racing, in Formula 1. So thank you for watching, and take care, and I will see you around, and keep watching more of the WWS COC and our races. Thank you, and good night.